You ever have one of those family dinners where you suddenly realize, wait a minute, am I the punchline here? Well, let me tell you about the night my son raised his glass and said, "Some people are important. Others just take up space, right, Mom?" Everyone laughed. I smiled, but inside, oh honey, I was already packing my bags. But what happened next? Well, buckle up, because this story isn't just about a dinner gone wrong. It's about finding your own space. And maybe, just maybe, learning to laugh at the chaos. Thanksgiving at our house was always a production, but this year, it felt more like a reality show, one where I wasn't sure if I was the star or just the comic relief. The house was filled with the scent of turkey, cinnamon, and a little bit of tension, as always. I'd spent the whole morning basting, chopping, and trying to keep my nerves in check. The table was set with my mother's old china, the kind with the tiny blue flowers, and the candles flickered, casting a warm glow over the faces of my family, some smiling, some smirking, and some, like my ex-husband's new wife, Heather, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Heather was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, determined to carve the turkey as if she was auditioning for a cooking show. She flashed me a tight smile, the kind that says, "I've got this," even though the turkey was so dry it could have doubled as a doorstop. My ex-husband, Tom, was already on his second glass of wine, chatting with his mother, Margaret, who hadn't smiled since Reagan was in office. And then there was my son, Jake, my baby, my pride and joy, the one I'd raised through scraped knees and heartbreaks, lounging at the end of the table, scrolling through his phone, looking for all the world like he was just waiting for the show to start. Dinner began the way it always did, with awkward small talk and forced laughter. Heather tried to impress everyone with her secret cranberry sauce recipe, which, let's be honest, came straight from a can. And Tom kept making jokes about how he'd let the ladies handle the kitchen. Margaret, as usual, was giving everyone her annual lecture on the true meaning of Thanksgiving, which mostly involved her reminiscing about how much better things were in the 1950s. I was just about to sneak away for a moment of peace when Jake suddenly stood up. Glass in hand, that familiar mischievous twinkle in his eye. I braced myself, hoping for a sweet toast, maybe a little gratitude for the woman who'd spent the last 2 days making sure everything was perfect. But Jake had other plans. He grinned, raised his glass, and said, "Some people are important. Others just take up space, right, Mom?" The room erupted in laughter. Even Margaret, who usually looked like she was sucking on a lemon, let out a cackle so sharp it could have sliced the turkey better than Heather's knife. Tom snorted into his wine, and Heather, emboldened by the laughter, actually winked at me. I felt my cheeks flush, but I did what any self-respecting woman would do. I smiled, sipped my wine, and started plotting my escape. It's funny, isn't it? How you can spend years building a life, raising a family, and in one moment, feel like you've been relegated to the background. Like you're just another piece of furniture, something to be dusted off and put on display for the holidays. I looked around the table at the faces of the people I loved, some by choice, some by circumstance, and wondered when exactly I'd become the extra in my own life. Jake was already basking in the glow of his own cleverness, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Was it hurt? Disappointment? Or maybe just the realization that the little boy I'd raised was now a man who could make a room full of people laugh at my expense. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired of being the one who held everything together, who made sure the traditions continued, who smiled through the jokes and the jabs. As the laughter died down and the conversation shifted to football and Black Friday sales, I found myself drifting. My mind wandered to the little house I'd seen online last week, the one 2,000 kilometers away, with the wraparound porch and the big, sunny kitchen. I'd bookmarked it, telling myself it was just a fantasy, something to look at when the noise of family life got too loud. But now, sitting at that table, I wondered if maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was a lifeline, a chance to start over somewhere new, where I could be more than just the punchline to someone else's joke. I looked down at my plate, at the dry turkey and the lumpy mashed potatoes, and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would turn out. I'd always pictured big, happy family gatherings, laughter that was warm and genuine, not sharp and cutting. I wanted to feel important, to know that I mattered, Not just as a cook or a hostess, but as a person. Was that too much to ask? Ever been the butt of a joke at your own table? It's a special kind of humiliation, one that lingers long after the laughter fades. It makes you question everything. Your choices, your relationships, your place in the world. When did I become the extra in my own life? When did I stop being the star of my own story? As the evening wore on and the dishes piled up in the sink, I made a silent promise to myself. This would be the last time I let anyone make me feel small in my own home. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done just taking up space. It was time to reclaim my place at the table, or maybe, just maybe, find a new table altogether. And as I poured myself another glass of wine and watched my family laugh and chatter, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, the best chapters of my story were still waiting to be written. That night, after the last dish was washed and the last guest had left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the echo of Jake's words still ringing in my ears. Some people are important. Others just take up space, right, Mom? The laughter had faded, but the sting lingered, sharp and insistent. I found myself replaying the evening in my mind, picking apart every glance, every chuckle, every little moment that made me feel like a background character in my own life. Is this it? I wondered. Is this what the next 20 years look like? Me, hosting dinners for people who barely see me, who think of me as little more than a fixture in the dining room? The thought was enough to make me want to pull the covers over my head and never come out. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it's exactly the push you need. Lying there in the dark, I realized I had a choice. I could keep going through the motions, letting life happen to me, or I could take the reins and make something happen for myself. Spoiler alert, I wasn't about to let the next 2 decades be a repeat of the last 2 hours. I'd spent too many years putting everyone else first. Jake, Tom, even Heather with her overzealous turkey carving. Maybe it was time to put myself at the top of the list for once. So I did what any woman with a little savings and a lot of gumption would do. I started looking for a house. Not just any house, mind you. I wanted something that felt like a fresh start, a place where I could breathe, where I could finally hear myself think. I spent hours scrolling through listings, my heart skipping a beat every time I saw a wraparound porch or a sun-drenched kitchen. I imagined myself sipping coffee in the mornings, reading a book in the afternoons, maybe even learning to bake bread that didn't double as a doorstop. The possibilities felt endless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of excitement. Of course, excitement's best friend is fear, and she showed up right on cue. Who moves across the country at 58? Who leaves behind everything familiar? Friends, family, the grocery store where the cashier knows your name, for a town where you don't know a soul? The doubts crept in, whispering that I was too old, too set in my ways, too much of a mom to just up and leave. But then I thought about that dinner table, about the way everyone had laughed, and I realized something important. If I didn't do this now, I might never do it. And if I wasn't living for myself, who was I living for? I found the house almost by accident, a cozy little place 2,000 kilometers away, nestled in a town I'd only ever seen on postcards. It had a big front porch, a garden out back, and just enough quirks to make it feel like home. Far enough that nobody could just drop by, but close enough for Amazon Prime to still deliver. I called the realtor the next morning, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. "I'd like to make an offer," I said, surprising even myself with how certain I sounded. Within a week, the papers were signed, and just like that, I was a homeowner again. Telling my family was another story. I waited until Sunday dinner, when everyone was gathered around the table, plates piled high with leftovers. Jake was scrolling through his phone, Heather was fussing with the centerpiece, and Tom was already halfway through his second helping of pie. I cleared my throat, my heart pounding in my chest. "I have some news," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I bought a house. 2,000 kilometers away. You could have heard a pin drop." Jake looked up, his mouth hanging open. Heather blinked, clearly unsure whether to congratulate me or ask if I'd lost my mind. Tom just stared, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But then I saw something in their faces. Surprise, yes, but also a flicker of respect. Maybe even a little envy. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of packing boxes, sorting through decades of memories, and saying goodbye to the life I'd known. There were moments when I questioned everything, when the enormity of what I was doing threatened to swallow me whole. But there were also moments of pure, unfiltered joy. Like the day I found my old journals from college, filled with dreams I'd long since forgotten. Or the afternoon I sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating takeout and laughing at how liberating it felt to have nothing left to lose. Moving day arrived, and as I watched the movers load the last box into the truck, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. I was leaving behind the familiar, yes, but I was also stepping into something new, something that was entirely, gloriously mine. I took one last look at the house I'd called home for so many years, whispered a quiet "thank you," and closed the door behind me. Driving away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road stretched out before me, full of possibility. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. After all, life is too short to just take up space. Sometimes you have to shake things up, and when you do, you just might find that the best is yet to come. Christmas came faster than I expected, as it always does. One minute you're packing away the last of the Thanksgiving leftovers, and the next you're knee-deep in tinsel, tangled lights, and the annual debate over whether to get a real tree or just drag the old artificial one out of the attic. This year I let them argue. I had bigger things on my mind, a secret that made me smile every time I thought about it, a secret that was about to change everything. The house looked the same as always, decked out in its holiday best. The same faded stockings hung from the mantel, the same ceramic Santa grinned from the side table, and the same old turkey, dry as ever, sat in the center of the table, waiting to be carved. Heather, my ex-husband's wife, was at it again, hacking away at the bird with the determination of a woman who refused to be bested by poultry. Jake lounged at the end of the table, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the world around him. Tom was already on his second glass of wine, and Margaret, bless her, was giving everyone her annual lecture on the true meaning of Christmas. But this year, I wasn't just another face at the table. I had a secret, a shiny, exciting, terrifying secret. I'd spent the last few weeks packing boxes, making lists, and daydreaming about my new life in a town where nobody knew my name. I'd signed the papers, scheduled the movers, and even picked out new curtains for the living room. All that was left was to tell my family. As everyone settled in, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the holiday dinner. I wasn't worried about whether the turkey would be too dry or if the gravy would be lumpy. I wasn't even bothered by the inevitable jokes at my expense. I had something better, a fresh start, a new adventure, and the knowledge that I was finally doing something just for me. I waited until everyone had their plates piled high and their glasses filled. The conversation was the usual mix of small talk and gentle ribbing, with Heather trying to impress everyone with her secret cranberry sauce recipe. Spoiler, it was straight from the can. And Jake making snarky comments about the state of the mashed potatoes. I let them have their fun, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, I stood up and raised my glass. The room quieted, all eyes on me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "I have an announcement," I said, smiling. "Good thing I just bought my own house 2,000 kilometers away from here. Don't worry, you'll never have to worry about me taking up space again." You could have heard a pin drop. For a split second, nobody moved. Jake's face was a picture, eyes wide, mouth open, fork frozen halfway to his lips. Heather nearly choked on her stuffing, coughing and sputtering as Tom patted her on the back. Margaret stared at me like I'd just announced I was running off to join the circus. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd just set down a burden I didn't even know I was carrying. The questions came fast and furious. "Mom, are you serious?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and something else. Maybe a little bit of pride, though he'd never admit it. "Where will you go?" Heather wanted to know, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Who will cook the turkey?" Tom chimed in, half joking, half panicked. I just smiled, enjoying the moment. "Guess you'll have to figure it out," I said, taking a sip of my wine. I hear there's a great deli down the street. Or maybe you could try one of those meal kits. I'm sure you'll manage. It was fascinating to watch the shift in the room. Suddenly, I was the hot topic, the center of attention. The woman who'd always been there, quietly making sure everyone else was happy, was now the one making waves. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the realization dawning that things were about to change, and not just for me. Ever notice how people only appreciate you when you're gone? It's like you're part of the scenery until you announce you're leaving, and then suddenly everyone wants to know your plans, your reasons, your feelings. Jake, who'd barely looked up from his phone all evening, was now peppering me with questions. What about your friends? What about your book club? What about us? I could see the worry in his eyes, the fear that maybe he'd taken me for granted one too many times. Heather, for all her bravado, looked genuinely concerned. Are you sure this is what you want? She asked, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It's a big move. I nodded, feeling more certain than ever. It's exactly what I want, I said. I've spent my whole life making sure everyone else was taken care of. Now it's my turn. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of questions, hugs, and even a few tears. Margaret, who'd always been a tough nut to crack, pulled me aside and whispered, "Good for you, dear. About time someone shook things up around here." Tom, to his credit, offered to help with the move, though I suspect he was mostly worried about who'd organize the family holidays from now on. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I was nervous, of course, who wouldn't be? But I was also excited, hopeful, and most importantly, proud of myself. I was finally taking up space in my own life, and it felt wonderful. Sometimes you have to leave the table to remind people just how much you matter. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Moving day dawned bright and early, the kind of morning that makes you believe anything is possible. The air was crisp, the sky a hopeful blue, and my heart was pounding with a cocktail of fear and excitement that I hadn't felt since my 20s. I stood in the middle of my old living room, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen, books, and memories, and took one last look around. The walls echoed with laughter and arguments, holidays and heartbreaks, the whole messy, beautiful history of a life well lived. But as the movers loaded the last box into the truck, I realized I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had always put everyone else first. I was terrified, yes, but I was also ready to see what life looked like when I was the one at the center of the story. The drive to my new home was long, but it felt like a journey toward freedom. I played my favorite songs, sang at the top of my lungs, and let the miles roll by like chapters in a book I was finally writing for myself. Every so often, doubt would creep in. What if I hated it? What if I was lonely? What if I'd made a huge mistake? But I pushed those thoughts aside. After all, I'd spent enough years worrying about everyone else's happiness. This was my time. When I finally pulled up to my new house, I felt a surge of joy so strong it nearly knocked me off my feet. There it was, my little cottage with its cheerful yellow door and the wraparound porch I'd dreamed about. The garden was overgrown, the paint was peeling in places, and the mailbox leaned a little to the left, but to me it was perfect. It was mine. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed in the scent of possibility. The rooms were empty, but I could already picture them filled with laughter, music, and the quiet contentment of a life lived on my own terms. Unpacking was a slow process, partly because I kept getting distracted by the view from the kitchen window or the way the sunlight danced across the hardwood floors. Every item I unwrapped felt like a small act of reclaiming myself. My favorite mug, the one nobody else was allowed to use, the stack of novels I'd been meaning to read for years, the old quilt my grandmother made, soft and worn from decades of use. Each piece was a reminder that I was building something new, something just for me. Of course, there were moments of fear. The first night, as I lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the house, I wondered if I'd been foolish to think I could start over at my age. The silence was deafening, and for a moment I missed the chaos of family life, the noise, the mess, even the bickering. But then I remembered the feeling of being invisible at my own table, of being taken for granted, and I knew I'd made the right choice. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something, my own happiness, and then something unexpected happened. The phone started ringing. At first, it was just Jake calling to ask if I'd arrived safely. "Mom, can I visit?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. "I miss you." Then came Heather, of all people, wanting to know if I had any tips for making gravy that didn't come from a jar. Tom even called, sheepishly admitting that he'd never realized how much work went into hosting the holidays. The calls kept coming, old friends, new neighbors, even Margaret, who wanted to know if I'd found a good church in my new town. It turns out, sometimes you have to leave the table to remind people you're not just taking up space, you're the main course. Suddenly, I was the one everyone wanted to talk to, the one whose opinion mattered, the one who was missed. It was a strange feeling, being appreciated from a distance, but it was also deeply satisfying. I realized that by choosing myself, I hadn't just changed my own life, I'd changed the way others saw me too. I started to settle into my new routine. Mornings spent sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the garden. Afternoons exploring the little shops and cafes in town, making friends with the locals who greeted me like an old friend. Evenings curled up with a good book, the quiet broken only by the sound of crickets outside my window. I joined a book club, signed up for a pottery class, and even started volunteering at the local animal shelter. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Really, truly alive. And you know what? I didn't miss the old life as much as I thought I would. Sure, there were moments of loneliness, but they were outweighed by the sense of freedom and possibility that came with starting over. I was no longer just filling a seat at someone else's table. I was building my own, inviting people in on my terms, and savoring every moment. So, let me ask you, when was the last time you did something just for you? When was the last time you put yourself first, took a risk, and chased your own happiness? Are you living your life or just taking up space at someone else's table? If you're waiting for permission, consider this it. Life is too short to be an extra in your own story. Go ahead, be the main course. You deserve it. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. Let's keep sharing, laughing, and reminding each other that it's never too late for a new beginning.